What's up YouTube? Capital G here. First and foremost, happy Thanksgiving to everybody who's watching this video. Whether you're spending Thanksgiving with your family, friends, whoever, I'd just like to wish you guys a happy and very safe Thanksgiving, especially if you're traveling. The card we're talking about in this video, and this is like a tech idea video, is a Magic Drain. I've actually been seeing this card see some play on Dueling Network, especially in back row reliant decks like Serteller Knights and Burning Abyss, and I've got to say, it is like surprisingly legitimate, and I think that it's more or less a product of the environment, not so much the card itself being like fantastically great. To give you guys a brief history on Magic Drain, the card came out in Pharaoh Servant. That's the 4th Yu-Gi-Oh! Booster set. The card is old as dirt. I remember because I used to always compare it like way back in the day to Magic Jammer, which was an ultra rare in Metal Raiders, and I was like, dude, I think Magic Drain is better than the Magic Jammer, because rather than having to give up 2 cards to negate a spell, I can actually get 2 cards and, or I could just get a 1-for-1 and negate that spell. So I always thought that Magic Drain was a good card. The problem is, and history has shown in Yu-Gi-Oh!, people are not generally willing to play the game of chance when they can get something guaranteed. There have been really good cards in this game's history that have really good effects, but people don't play them because there's always the possibility that you won't get that effect. Like the biggest example I can give you guys is Blowback Dragon. Blowback Dragon came out in Ancient Sanctuary, and Zaborg came out in the same exact set. The stats of the monsters were pretty much even. Zaborg had a little more attack, but Blowback Dragon could use its effect every single turn, and it could potentially blow up a card every single turn, but people always played Zaborg over it because Zaborg was guaranteed to, as soon as you summon it, blow up a monster and just get rid of that card instantly, where Blowback Dragon wasn't guaranteed to blow that card up. And hell, I mean, Blowback Dragon could even blow up back rows. Zaborg couldn't do that, but people always shifted towards Zaborg. If you guys watch my stream, you know that I play Fairy Box a lot in like a good amount of my decks, or even something like Time Wizard that, that card could have been a 50% chance of Regeki, but people really never played it because it could blow up your own field. It's just, don't summon it when you have like monsters on the board. But anyways, back to Magic Drain. So the reason I feel like Magic Drain is actually pretty good right now is because more so than ever, we are living in a pendulum world. I know that earlier this year and late last year, we had the Clee Forts, and they were a really strong deck, but at the time that Clee Forts were out, they were pretty much the only good pendulum deck. So it really wouldn't have served purpose to main deck something like Magic Drain when you're only maining it against one deck. And even though Necroz was a deck that, it liked to use a lot of spells during their first turn, they could just, like, if you Magic Drained a Kaleido Mirror or a Necroz, Cycle or something like that, their next turn, they could just banish it from the graveyard and get another copy. So it's like you didn't really do that much damage. But for everybody out there, just so you know, and this is one of the biggest reasons Magic Drain is so good, if your opponent activates a Pendulum card in the Pendulum Zone, you can Magic Drain it because it's considered to be activating a spell. That's the real reason why this card is so fantastic. If your opponent activates that Magispector Coon in their Pendulum Scale, or if they play that Draco Slayer, that Luster Pendulum, because this card is pretty much everywhere now. It's gonna end up being like $70, but that's beyond the point. You can just Magic Drain that immediately, and they cannot discard another Pendulum. They still have to discard a spell, and in a format where, like, people are not playing a ton of spells because, like, our road account is down and people aren't really playing Book of Moon anymore. Like, I don't really see a lot of times where people just have random cards to discard for, like, they don't just keep random spells in their hand to discard. I mean, you see it all the time with Brilliant Fusion. How many times do you really see people summon, the Gem Knight in attack mode and actually discard a spell and attack? Like, you really don't see that much, because if people have other spells in their hand, like, they really need to use them. So, outside of like Galaxy Cyclone, I don't really think you're going to see a lot of people discarding like spells or whatever. Now, the thing is, you could think, okay, well, Cap, what about this card outside of Pendulum based decks? Because you're not always going to play Magispectors, you're not always going to play Performages and Pals or Pendulum Magicians, but even if you happen to come across like a Cosmo match, you could easily Magic Drain a Reasoning, Magic Drain, something like maybe Cosmo Town, Magic Drain a Emergency Teleports, and I believe, let me just read Cosmo Town, because I believe this card has to be face up on the field and destroyed, but Magic Drain actually negates the activation. So If this card in the field zone is destroyed, okay, yeah. So the activation, if your opponent activates, what's it called? If your opponent activates Cosmo Sound and you Magic Drain it and they can't pay, they won't get the search because the card was never actually, like, it wasn't never on the field. The actual negation was negated. So this is just a card that you guys should look into. I know that players don't like to play the game of chance, but even if you do, like even if your opponent does get that effect through, the reason that Magic Drain is also pretty good now, and it wouldn't have been good in past formats like Teledad or Dad Return, is because when you look at the spell pool of the game, especially just the good generic spell cards, like there really aren't that many great powerful generic spell cards that you can play in a bunch of decks. There's pretty much Regeki and Soul Charge, and then everything else is just kind of a tier below. And a lot of these Pendulum decks don't even play Soul Charge because obviously Pendulum cards don't go to the graveyard. They don't go to the graveyard. They go to the extra deck face up. So like even Soul Charge isn't seeing a ton of play. Regeki still does see a lot of play. But if you would have tried to play Magic Drain in past formats like in Teledad or Dad Return, I mean, your opponent was liable to activate Giant Trunade, Heavy Storm, Cold Wave, you know what I mean? These cards, and if they resolved them, I mean, they're liable to just kill you right then and there. So that's why people always played Solemn Judgment, so that they could definitively stop that card because they knew, shit, if I get Heavy Stormed, I'm just gonna die. In this format, if your opponent activates a Reasoning and they happen to just pitch the MST or another card in their hand, you might not die. Now, this card is a spell speed 3, which obviously is a bonus because that means that only things like Alpha Nova or Wiretap can send it back. And pretty much Sotelo Knights, I mean, until the new Solemns come out, like, Sotelo Knights are really the only ones main decking, counter traps outside of, Solemn Warning, which everybody main decks. But until Notice comes out, people really aren't playing that many counter traps right now. So when you play this card, it should definitively be the last action. It's just, you're not always guaranteed to stop that spell, but this card is really, really good against Pendulum. So let me know what you guys think. I think that it's definitely worth checking out and definitely worth playing. Even in the main deck, I just think that you have to play a very back row heavy deck. This is not something you can splash in and perform Ages and Pals. Like, you have to play Burning Abyss or Yang Zings or Sotelo Knights. You have to play a deck that you can obviously support this with even more traps to kind of, have this plus a skill drain. Just make sure your opponent can't Pendulum summon anything that matters. Or as soon as they try and play that Pendulum, it's like, nope, you got to pitch another spell. Can't pitch a Pendulum card. So let me know what you guys think. I think the card's pretty good. Thank you guys for watching as always.